Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Buckeye Blueprint, your weekly source for Ohio State football analysis. My name is Colin Hassel, and I'm joined as always by Nick McWilliams and Jacob Myers of the Lantern. We didn't see this coming a week ago. The Ohio State Buckeyes suffered their first loss of the season in State College, PA, to Penn State, 24-21. After prior week's close win against Wisconsin, should we have been more prepared that this outcome may be on the horizon, Nick?
You know, if we look back, this game, Ohio State really seemed to struggle on offense quite a bit. You know, defensively, they didn't necessarily give up a statistically big game to Penn State, but they had a few plays where they had to stop them and couldn't do it. The last few weeks, we've been looking at Ohio State's offense, and there's been a lot of question marks. You know, it hasn't been producing at the level it's supposed to. You know, the receivers aren't really playing as well as they should. Running game's been a bit of a question, even though they still average well over 7 yards a carry, probably. Might be more closer to 5 now that I think about it. I think with the way that this team's played in the last few weeks, this shouldn't be that big of a surprise. Maybe that it came to Penn State, not a team like Nebraska or Wisconsin, but you know, overall, I'm not overly shocked.
I agree with it, and it's really not that I do think that they played similarly on offense. I think the real difference was the fact that special teams, they played like a team that has never played special teams before. I had to write this all down. They missed a PAT, had a blocked field goal, had a blocked punt, fumbled a punt return, and muffed a kickoff return. That's insane. I don't think they've had 5 total miscues in every other game combined.
Yeah, and there were some signs in earlier games where maybe the kickoff coverage wasn't as great. You know, they average well over 20 yards on kickoff return, and Tyler Durbin only had 1 touchback on his kickoff, so that's also a hole there. But you know, that it has been a strength over the years for Coach Obermeyer, and you know, obviously Saturday it wasn't, and you know, those special teams blunders gave Penn State a short field to work with and an OSU defense that was already tired from being on the field quite often.
You know, I mentioned to you before the start of the game, we were looking at the goalpost, and the way that Beaver Stadium is designed, I don't know if it was the way the wind was just coming into the stadium, but the wind seemed to be swirling because on one end they were pointing in, on the other end they were pointing in. So that could have possibly contributed to Durbin only getting the one touchback in this game. As for everything else, there's not really an excuse. You know, there was a big breakdown in blocking during that blocked field goal, and Cameron Johnston just seemed to walk right into that punt. Although I know he does the rugby-style punting, so he moves to his right in order to get the ball off. But just too many problems on that unit in order to too many problems that led to Ohio State being behind on the scoreboard.
And that made sense, that the fact that they lost, because they haven't really played that great on offense, and this just compounded their issues, and now they had to play even better on defense. And this is a defense that played pretty well. But I know we want to get into it. Curtis Samuel had 10 touches. He had 2 rushes and 8 receptions. Jacob, we'll start with you. No, let's start with Nick, because I know Nick has a slightly opposing view. Do you think that they should have forced more touches to him? I mean, because Urban Meyer has said in the past that he wants to get him the ball. He is the best playmaker on the team.
I am absolutely glad that you said forced more touches to him, because, you know, anyone who's played football, anyone who's coached football, anyone who's watched football understands that, yes, your number one playmaker is the biggest bell cow for your offense. He has to get the ball a lot during the game. Be that as it may, no offense that's ever been successful has lived by that standard. You know, last year I think we watched Ohio State try to feed certain players the ball consistently. You know, Braxton Miller was a kind of a guy who they seem to try to throw the ball a lot. And anytime you do an offense that you're really smothering yourself if you're only handing it off to one guy or passing it to one guy consistently. Offenses have to flow. You have to find other guys to produce. When Penn State is keying in on Curtis Samuel, you have to find the next guy up to be able to be open. There should have been a lot more opportunities to get ball to other players if the Nittany Lions were indeed keying on Curtis Samuel. So I think this is more about the execution and the play calling.
But if no one's open, do you sort of have to force it to him in your mind?
Well, that's a whole nother thing. Is last year they had so many guys like Michael Thomas, Jalen Marshall, Braxton Miller, where they were trying to get him a certain number of touches, whereas I think they should have just gone to a certain player knowing him, he can get the yards. Yeah, you should always spread the ball around because the defense is going to key into a guy. But what Urban has said all year is, you know, they want to have a balanced attack on offense. They want to balance the run. They want to balance the pass, something they didn't do last year. And it seemed to be a point of emphasis. But if you look at the 2 games they've struggled the most on offense, it's when Curtis Samuel's touches were a little bit very unbalanced. He had 2 rushes this game, one being 74 yards. And to me, just not getting him the ball after that is kind of ludicrous. And then he had 8 receptions, whereas Indiana, all of his touches came on the ground. So I think there has to be a standard, whereas, you know, he didn't have first quarter touches. You have to get him the ball then. No question about that. But if you're going to limit him to 10 or so carries, make sure it's balanced and not favoring one side.
You know, something I do want to touch upon, though, is Curtis Samuel only having 2 rushes. Even though I have my feelings about the offense that I do, him only having 2 rushes is pretty low. You know, that's a bad idea. And everyone wants to go back to that 74-yard touchdown run. Great play. But in my mind, it wasn't necessarily Samuel so much on that play. If you go back and watch the tape of it again, Mike Weber had a fantastic block in the hole. And not only that, Penn State read it kind of wrong and had most of their secondary crash to that side, which it looked like Weber was getting the handoff. Instead, it went to Samuel, wide open hole, no one's going to touch him. So, again, that's why I think it comes down to execution. You know, that was a great executed play. If you put Weber in there for that same play and have Samuel block, maybe Samuel doesn't block as well, or maybe Weber gets caught from behind. But I still think it's more a fact of the play calling and what the players have to do with it. Samuel took advantage of a great hole. He didn't necessarily do that on his own.
Yeah, I think that I do think they need to force the ball to him, and at the same time, I understand the fact that maybe Penn State is keying on him. But when you have other playmakers, you have J.T. Barrett and Curtis Samuel at the top. You have Mike Weber and Noah Brown, who I think we all agree that Noah Brown should probably be targeted more than 2 to 3 times a game.
We definitely agree on that.
Beyond those 4 guys, to me, the level of talent it's pretty steep at the moment. And I don't know if it's inexperience, which I do think it is, because they definitely lost a lot last year, or just sort of a lack of talent that they need to rely on. You got to get Curtis Samuel the ball, even in the situations where the other team knows that he's going to get the ball. And
well, interesting enough, you know, Meyer actually did say today about his wide receivers that they're all about on the same level right now. So that could also contribute to the fact of how the offense is struggling a bit. You know, I said execution, but also if receivers aren't getting open, they're just not getting open. And if Noah Brown's not getting open, and since Meyer said that all his receivers are about on the same level, that means nobody's getting open.
And Barrett said today that their game plan at Penn State was getting those passes in their intermediate range, whereas I think a lot of people would agree that in the past, Meyer's offense has the best success when they take shots downfield. And really haven't seen that. Granted, JT was scrambling a lot from the pocket and couldn't stand in there and make a deep pass. But that's another thing that goes to the balance of the offense that I think they need to find their niche.
And I know we want to talk more about the very bad pass blocking. We're going to take a look at some of the struggles Ohio State had against Penn State's pass rush. And exclusively almost it happened on these twists. Watch as the defensive tackles run outside of the offensive tackles on the opposite side of the ball. So here's an example. Right here, you see that defensive tackle run from the left side of Ohio State's line all the way on the right side past Isaiah Prince, the right tackle. And thankfully for Ohio State, it takes a long time to develop, allowing J.T. Barrett to find Curtis Samuel. But Isaiah Prince here once again, he is the key. Every single time that Ohio State dropped back, these are all in the very last drive of the quarter, right over here. Does the running, man, it pretty much looks like, and he gets pushed back, and JT has to scramble and check down. And this bothered Ohio State in the last drive because Penn State really keyed in on Isaiah Prince being an issue. And here, once again, Isaiah Prince, the Penn State blitz a linebacker. You're going to see it again right here. Isaiah Prince tries to block 48, and he doesn't get to the linebacker, number 43, in time, forcing JT out of the pocket once again. And JT, this time, just throws it away. And again, Isaiah Prince, they do a twist, like we showed in the first play. Right over here, 40 twists, Isaiah Prince too slow. He's got to bend the knees, and he can't, and J.T. Barrett is sacked. And this happened to Ohio State all game.
Ohio State's struggles could really be seen on their second-to-last drive on offense, like especially here on first down. J.T. Barrett goes back to pass, and while he does get some good protection, can't find a wide-open Marcus Ball. See right here in the middle, Billy Price and Pat Elflein block off the pass rush from the middle. And the edge is blocked as well. But Marcus Ball can't find his way to the ball. Here on second down, there's a designed swing pass to Curtis Samuel. It's a play that Ohio State likes to go to a lot, but Penn State was ready for it. It did pick up about 6 or 7 yards, but not near enough for the first down. You can see that Barrett was immediately looking for Samuel and went directly to him, but the Penn State defenders swarmed him quickly. Here on third down, Barrett has a designed pass deep to Terry McLaurin. Unfortunately for Ohio State, though, Penn State got away with a pretty blatant hold. As you see McLaurin come into frame, the defender grabs onto his jersey and holds him back. This resulted in the Penn State defender almost getting an interception. So then, Ohio State goes up for a field goal on fourth down, but we all know what happens. There's an easy block for Penn State as they got great penetration. And the only player trying to stop the returner for Penn State is Cameron Johnson, the punter. And Well, doesn't really tackle too often, as we can tell. The penetration happens right here in the middle, and a Penn State player got his hand on it. The ball took a friendly bounce, and it was all Penn State from there.
Defensive side of the ball for Ohio State, the Buckeyes really played pretty well, I would say.
Yeah, overall they seem to perform pretty well for most of the game. However, there were a few plays that they absolutely had to get a stop. Late there in the first half when Garyon Conley had pretty good defense on the receiver. I think it was Chris Goodwin, correct? And the plays that they had to stop them, they were unable to do, and that's what really ended up hurting Ohio State in the end.
Because McSorley went 8 for 23 for 154 yards, and I think at least 3 or 4 of them came in these clutch situations where he just made a play. And that's something that I think in prior weeks that Ohio State had mentioned, they're a bend but don't break defense, where they may allow some big plays, but at the end of the day, they won't allow the team to get in the end zone. That was not the case on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think one of the most glaring parts of that is, going into this game, the defense let up 62.5% of red zone possessions for scores, and that was best in the country. Now, they had a short field a few times, but the one that really, I think, hurt OSU and you saw weaknesses was right before the half. OSU almost never allows scores before the half, and Penn State was allowed to gash them, and they went right down the field, scored with 9 seconds to go in the half, and that cut the deficit to 5, whereas you're going into half up 12-0, you're feeling really good about yourself, and that crowd may be out of the game.
Yeah, not only that, there were multiple times that I noticed with the secondary, not so much Conley on that play going in to score, but there were multiple times that I saw the secondary, that you might not have picked this up at home watching it on TV, but whenever the ball was released from McSorley, the cornerbacks for Ohio State kind of looked lost. They were looking up, trying to locate the ball, weren't on their receiver like they needed to be, and that kind of led to some wide open looks for them.
News conference after Ohio State's loss, head coach Urban Meyer talked about the lack of stability on the offensive side of the ball. Specifically about the wide receivers, Meyer said, quote, "There is not a big differentiation in our group right now." He went on to say that he wishes someone would separate themselves from the pack. There is one player that has done that, though. However, he's not a receiver. Dual threat H-back Curtis Samuel is second on the team in rushing and first on the team in receiving. He's averaging 142 all-purpose yards per game. After Samuel, though, the receiving game takes a major drop-off. Noah Brown is the second leading receiver in this offense and has 18 less catches than Samuel. Also, only 8 of the Buckeyes' 18 receiving touchdowns have gone to wide receivers, 6 of which have gone to Noah Brown. The Ohio State passing game is in a good position to turn the tides this week against Northwestern. The Wildcats are last in the Big Ten in passing defense and have given up an average of 282 passing yards per game. The offensive game plan going into this game needs to rely on the passing game. Look for receivers like Brown, Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, or even tight end Marcus Baugh to have a big game against the Wildcats secondary.
2 teams going in opposite directions. A 4-3 Northwestern team comes to Columbus on Saturday looking for its 4th straight win. After losses to Western Michigan and Illinois State to open the season, Northwestern's beat Iowa, Michigan State, and Indiana in consecutive weeks. Do you think they have the talent to topple OSU for a second week in a row?
I think coming out this week, OSU is really going to be fired up. I think a lot of these players are going to emphasize their work regimen in this week of practice. And, Justin Jackson, best running back in the Big Ten statistically right now, and they run a very fast-paced offense, hot team, like you said, coming off those wins. But I think OSU is going to come forward and win this one fairly handily.
Do you see this being a sort of a situation like in 2014 when Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech, and then they came back the next week, beat Kent State 66-0, and then put up 50 points in the next 3 games?
I don't know. I do agree with Jacob saying that this team will probably come out and be a lot more confident than they were against Penn State. Penn State, they played very tight, looked scared, Beaver Stadium, very hard place to play. But now that they're coming back home, I think they will be able to top Northwestern without much of a struggle, but I think it's going to be a kind of a similar game to Indiana. They're not necessarily going to put this team away early. It might drag on a little bit, but I think they get some of their confidence back, and I actually see this game having an identical score as they did against the Hoosiers with 38-17.
So do you see this, if Ohio State can't beat Northwestern by a fair amount, by over 23, which is what the spread is right now, do you see that as sort of an issue given that Northwestern's defense is, I would say, solidly below average?
420 yards a game, actually.
There you go.
Well, that was the same case with Penn State. They were the 102nd ranked rushing defense coming into that game. If they can't figure out issues here, I would hope that they would be addressed after this game. I would hope that they were addressed after Penn State, but if they're not,
You have to be worried, right?
Absolutely, but you still get a win under your belt. You know you have a top-ranked team coming in next week in Nebraska. That they could still be undefeated if they top Wisconsin. You know, that should be the focus. I think a win would still do a lot to their confidence, regardless of the margin.
Do you have a prediction?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to go 44-28 Ohio State.
I think solidly, at least they're going to score 40. I see this being like the 2014 game where they just lay it on Northwestern. I think this is going to be at least 45-14. I think the defense, I can't see this defense giving up 28 points personally. I think this is way too talented of a defense, unless the special teams does exactly what they did last week.
Right. And I expect Curtis Samuel will get a few more touches.
Yeah.
And I can promise you, Kerry Combs has definitely been working on his special teams already. It's only been, 2 days removed from it, but if I know anything about Combs, he's already on it.
That guy doesn't sleep regardless.
Less than 5 hours of last 48 hours, maybe. All right, that's been our show for today. Thank you for watching. Thanks to Nick and Jacob, and we'll see you next week.